When the raven came at dusk with the smell of rain still clinging to its feathers, Robb Stark broke the seal with fingers that were steadier than he felt. The parchment was damp, the ink feathered along its strokes. Maester Luwin's neat hand smudged in 2 places as if hurried. Behind him the tent walls moved with the soft breathing of the canvas, and beyond them the river muttered over stones like an old man arguing with himself. Grey Wind lifted his head from the rushes and watched Robb's face as his eyes moved down the page. The words cut like sleet. Winterfell taken. Theon Greyjoy. Betrayal. Catelyn's knuckles were pale where she gripped the back of a chair. She did not speak, and in her silence there was a world. The Godswood, the old weirwood with its red eyes, the echo of children's laughter along the covered walkways of home. It was 1,000 miles of memory pressed into the pause between breaths. Robb's jaw worked once, then stilled. He read the letter again. The rain came on harder, paper thin and whispering, a curtain between the camp and the river. Somewhere near the cook fires men laughed, the sound small and ordinary in a world that had tilted. "Read it aloud," Great John Umber said. "Too loud, always too loud." He had shoved aside the tent flap with a meat plate in one hand, grease shining on his beard. Beside him stood Roose Bolton, pale-eyed, as calm as a blank field beneath snow. Robb lifted the parchment. Winterfell was taken at dawn 3 days past. The attackers wore no banners. Theon Greyjoy commands them. Our guard was overmatched. I have sent ravens. Bran and Rickon are alive as I write. Theon demands we yield the castle. He claims to be Prince of Winterfell. Grey Wind's growl came low. The tent crowded at his shoulders. The sour-sweet smell of wet wool and men and horses pressed close. Robb did not see them. He saw a boy with salt in his hair laughing in a muddy practice yard. A knife flashed from a sleeve, steel clattering in the snow, their breath in bright clouds as they spun and struck and fell. "Traitor's blood," Great John said. He set the plate on a stand so hard the cup beside it jumped. "Ironborn whelp, give me 500 spears and I'll bring you his head for a drinking cup." "Spears to pass the neck?" Bolton's voice was mild. "Moat Cailin is in Ironborn hands. Without boats, any army that enters the bog will be devoured by sand and fever. We would lose 10 for one taken, and the one might be a frog-eater with no news to tell. The girl there, your wife's friend in the Crannigs. She would not lead us. She will say she cannot. She will say the neck only opens for them. She's not my wife's friend." Robb's lips were dry. The rain found a seam, a thin thread chill down his nape. "She is the daughter of Howland Reed, who was father's friend, and she does not hold Moat Cailin." He handed the parchment to his mother. Rain hissed on the coals. Catelyn smoothed the page with careful fingers, as if by ordering ink she might order events. She had not said Theon's name, not even once. He saw it on her face anyway, not anger yet but something prior to it, something harder for being older. "We will get word to Ser Roderick," Robb said. "White Harbor musters at his call. Tallheart, Glover, Serwyn." "Serwyn is dead," Roose Bolton said. "Or near enough, it makes no matter. The Iron Men burned the fields about his hall. That was before they struck for Winterfell." Robb nodded once. The river sang and sang. He closed his fist and felt his nails bite the meat of his palm. "Howland Reed will move the Crannogmen along the causeways. Harrenhal can be held with 1,000 men and a sour face, but the neck is ours. We will not feed spears to bogs. We will feed Iron Men to the crabs." Great John grinned, teeth bright. Bolton's mouth did not move. Catelyn lifted her eyes, blue and winter clear. "What will you do with Theon if he is taken?" "He will be taken," Robb said. He let the word stand as promise. "If Ser Roderick takes him, he is to hold him and send him south to me under guard." "You would not." Catelyn looked down at the letter and back again. She did not finish the thought. Robb felt her weigh things. Hostage and leverage, the custom of the North and the law that Ned Stark had taught his son with frost on his beard and ice in his hand. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. He was a ward. He was a hostage, Robb said. He ate at our table and swore to us. He raised our banners. He slept under our roof. He is the measure by which we ask the north to stand. He is the span of my father's name. If he is taken, I will do what the law demands." Outside, the rain hardened to a drumming. Robb rolled the stiffness from his neck and shoulders, set quill to parchment, and wrote. By the road where the hills sloped down toward the Green Fork, Ser Rodrik Castle battled the wet as he rode with 200 men at his back. His beard was white with it, a dripping banner. The cat he had found beneath a fallen thatch at Winterfell, a small smoke-gray thing that had taken to sleeping in the crook of his elbow, was now curled beneath his cloak and cursing all the world in tiny hot hisses. Felt wrong to leave, wrong as ill-cut boots. Winterfell stones had known his weight since he was young, and every step away was a step against his bones. But he had drawn the garrison across the courtyards while Theon Greyjoy crowed and the Iron Men swaggered. He had counted faces, heard accents, weighed blades. The boy was quick at the mouth and quicker at the lie. He had left a gap at the west postern where he thought no one would see. Ser Rodrik had left 2 men there he trusted more than his own shadow, and he had given them the only order that mattered. Watch for a raven. The bird came under a cloud like a thumb pressed down on the bowl of the sky. Luwin's hand, Rodrik thought, as he took the scroll. His fingers trembled when he read the words at first. Not with fear. Ara not with cold. There was a line in the letter written sharp and uncompromising. If Theon Greyjoy is taken, hold him safe and send him with haste to the king that the king may judge. Ser Rodrik lowered the scroll. He looked to the towers of Winterfell, deep gray against a lowing sky, and felt a case-hardened calm settle over him like a second skin. Not revenge, then. Not back of the stables with a rope and a stool. He had lived long enough to learn that fury spent at once rarely built anything that stood. "We go to parley," he told Leobald Tallheart, "with the traitor prince and his 15 wet boys. Gods give me patience enough not to laugh." Leobald had a face made for disapproval. "He will only lie, sir. He will spill words until he finds the one you cannot swallow. We are all men who have eaten hard bread." Rodrik nudged his mare forward, water splashing. "Bring me the stout-hearted and the slow of voice. Will not be tricked into serves for his supper." Theon Greyjoy received them in Winterfell's yard as if it were a deck and the snow stone a heaving sea, his stance all sway. He wore the leather and iron of the Iron Islands as if trying to convince the bones beneath. Theon smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. Ser Rodrik thought he looked thinner than the last time he had seen him, a boy too eager to put on a man's skin. "Old Ser Rodrik," Theon said, hands spread, generous as a lord who had bought his lands with a purse heavier than his honor. "You will yield? It is not in me to fight you, old friend. Let us talk as men." "I am not your friend," Ser Rodrik said. He took a breath for patience. "And you are no man I would choose to talk with. Yet here you are." Theon's grin was all salt. "You should have bent the knee before. It would have gone easier." "What do you want?" Ser Rodrik said. "Say it plain. Provisions, hostages, and your oath. I will have your pledge for the safety of the castle and all within. I will allow you to withdraw your men with their arms to Torrhen's Square unharmed. You have no hope of relief. Moat Cailin holds the neck. Even if your paper king tries to come north, he will find the reeds thirstier than the men who wait behind them." "My king," Ser Rodrik said, very soft. "You remember him. He was a boy then too. He never lied as well as you." Words blew like rain from Theon. A squall. He had the list of demands ready, and he rattled them off while watching Ser Rodrik's eyes, testing, probing, looking for a flinch. There was a moment when he pushed his heel down and overreached, when he demanded names of boys and women to give over as pledges. Ser Rodrik felt the anger rise, cool, and settle. "No," he said. "You will release the castellan you arrested. You will release the maester you bound. You will allow the children to come to me and go with me to White Harbor until this war ends. You will leave Winterfell with your men alive and with their knives no longer in their hands." He leaned forward. "And you will come south with me." He saw it land, saw how Theon's shoulders shifted as a sailor shifts to a new swell. "You think I am a fool," Theon said. "You think I will put my head in a trap. You already have." Ser Rodrik let the rain have his face. "You are a hostage to your own name. If you think the king in the north will balance your life against anything, you have not known a Stark as you claimed." The faces around Theon told the story. Dagmar with the saw-teeth scar tugging his beard and peering at the ground, Black Lauren's eyes narrowed to mean slits, a boy with sea-bright hair chewing his bottom lip. They were growing restless, and they were hungry, and they were far from their boats. "Attend me," Theon snapped, the iron in his voice dented. He turned, and the turning saved him, because the man who had stood 2 steps behind him moved when he did. He wore rags tied with strips of green cloth, the stink of him heavy in the wet. He held himself like a beaten dog. Ser Rodrik had seen him once before with a sack of bloody rats slung over his shoulder and a lie ready in his mouth about the taste of rat meat when cooked with pine. He called himself Reek. His eyes were small and pale as ice marbles. Beware, my lord prince," Reek whispered near Theon's ear. "Ser Rodrik will trick you. He smiles, but his teeth are a trap." Theon's confidence came back like a wave recoiling from rock. He lifted his chin. "No parle. We will talk from the walls. Attend me in the hall, Dagmar." He turned again, and that was when a boy in a cloak the gray of rain made his move. It was not a boy at all. The face beneath the hood was weathered as old leatherwork, with scar puckers along the jaw and eyes the color of a summer pond. He stepped out from the angle of the stable and the wall where any Winterfell boy might stand to piss. In one hand he held a short spear tipped with black stone that drank the light, and in the other a horn of wood polished by thumbs. He gave a short, shrill blast, and out of nowhere they came. They wore colors that were no colors, cloaks of brush and reed. Their feet, they swarmed through the postern where Theon's men were fey. They took the gate from within, they barred the hall and barred the hall again. Theon fought. Ser Rodrik would say that for him later when there was a place for fairness. He fought like a boy who had something to prove to a father who would never accept it. He broke a Crannogman's spear, shot an arrow into a man with dark hair and skin like the bark of a wet oak, and then he saw Ser Rodrik coming and he came like a hound to meet with a snarl. Rodrik parried, felt the weight and angle of the blade, knew the boy was quick and strong and unused to men who hit like trees with iron strapped to them. He beat Theon back, step by step through rain and blood, until Theon's heel struck the threshold of the Godswood Gate, and he went down on his back and the world became leaves and sky and a beard white as surf looming above him. "Yield," Rodrik said, and the word had the weight of stone. Theon spat. Bloody froth flecked his lips. His eyes flicked sideways, to the shape under that ragged cloak. Reek, pale as cut fat, worming toward a dropped knife. Ser Rodrik put his boot on Theon's wrist and leaned, and something gave with a sound like a rotten plank. Theon gasped. Reek froze with his hand on the knife hilt. He smiled, and in the smile Ser Rodrik saw a wolf's toothy dream. "Put it down," Ser Rodrik said. Reek's fingers left the knife as if the wood had burned. He lowered his eyes and mumbled something about loyalty. Theon arched his back, sweat plain on his face despite the rain. Dagmar nowhere, Lauren nowhere. The yard was all men of the north now, their voices deep and their steps sure, and the rain washed the blood away as fast as it spilled. "I yield," Theon hissed. It was not a moment for triumph. Rodrik breathed out. "Bind him," he said, and he saw it was done. "Maester Luwin," he said, and remembered with a shock of shame that they had left Luwin bound in the dark. "Leo bawled, 'I'll fetch him.' And the boys," Rodrik said. He closed his eyes and saw Bran, saw Rickon, saw oath and habit and 30 winters of making do. "Bring them here." The maester wept when they cut the cords. He wept again when he put his hands on the boys and found their chests rising and falling whole. Bran's face was like a white coin stamped with a strange king. Rickon clung to Shaggy Dog's ruff and would not let go. Osha stood behind them with damp hair braided back and a knife at her hip. Her eyes never left Theon when they brought him through the yard with his hands bound in front of him to keep his shoulder from tearing itself apart. "You should have killed me," Theon said to her, and she smiled in that way of hers where the mouth knew joy but the eyes knew nothing at all. "You offered me no silver, Prince," she said, "and I had no quarrel with you yet." The Crannogmen built a litter, and Ser Rodrik set men about the task of taking Theon south with all the speed the watery roads permitted. "He will stand before the king in the north," he said aloud, so that all might hear it, so that there would be a record of it in the mouths of any who might later wish to spin the cloth their own way. "He will be judged." Luwin set his hand on Bran's hair. He looked at Ser Rodrik, and there was in his eyes the weary hope of a man who had eaten hunger and found it less filling than he'd been promised. "You will send word?" "By 3 ravens," Ser Rodrik said, "and I will send a 4th with a name tied to its leg for the gods." The 4th raven carried, in a shaky hand not written by a maester, a single word of a name. Reek. Grey Wind scented Theon before the guards announced him. The wolf stiffened, nostrils flaring, teeth low in his mouth. Robb stroked him behind the ear and felt the animal settle the way he had learned to, the way he kept himself from the edge. His mother stood to one side, her face a mask of courtesy that the camp could read as gentleness and Robb could read as the shell around a heart that still bled. It was a small sound, and some men would later say he had laughed like a child, and some would say like a man who had finally found a punchline in a long bad jest, and some would say it was only the noise a fox makes when trapped. "You should have killed me yourself when we were boys, wolf," he said, and he knelt. The guards took his bound hands and lifted them away from his throat. He bowed his head. Grey Wind moved like a shadow to Robb's left. Catelyn drew breath. Ser Rodrik stood square as a stump. Roose Bolton stood a little apart, hands folded, watching with those pale eyes that never seemed to blink enough. Robb lifted the sword. He felt the weight of it in his shoulder and elbow. He felt the pull in his lower back from long days in the saddle and longer nights on bad ground. He had practiced. He knew the swing. Still, it was a man's neck, and the neck was a stubborn column. The blade came down and did not balk. The head rolled a little, as they always did. The face was surprised and not surprised at all. Grey Wind whined, a sound so soft that only those closest could hear it. The rain was hard and immediate outside, and between tent and earth the air smelled of wet leather and blood and nothing of the sea at all. A guard bent and picked up the head. Another took the body. Robb had to make a small conscious effort to loosen his grip on the sword. Catelyn let out the breath she had held. Ser Rodrik's lips moved and might have formed the old words for the dead. Roose Bolton's face was a wall. Later, when the night lay on the camp and the rain had peeled away to a fine spray like the breath of the river itself, Robb sat alone with Grey Wind. He put his hand in the wolf's thick mane and felt the steady thrum of life under his fingers. The tent was empty. The fire burned low. Robb's sword lay across his knees, still in its scabbard, and the weight was the weight of what came next. He thought of Theon's last question to him, the way it had landed, the way it had tried to make the world small enough to hold only 2 sons and 1 father's shadow. He thought of his own father's hand on his shoulder, warm and heavy, when he was a boy and frightened or proud. He thought of the gods in the heart tree at Winterfell and of their silence. He did not think he had done wrong. He did not feel good. The two had nothing to do with each other. He had used words like span and measure and law to stand himself upright. He had done what a king was to do, which is the thing that must be done. There were 100 things yet to do. He unrolled the letter from Ser Rodrik about Bran and Rickon and Luwin, written in a firm hand despite the rain. The boys had lived through a betrayal. They had been taken to the crypts for safety and then out again, small and pale and hard-eyed in ways that made Robb's heart ache in a different shape than it had that afternoon. He traced Bran's name with his thumb and remembered his brother laughing and the smell of crushed mint under their boots when they raced beside the fish pond. He rolled the letter again and set it by the candle. Grey Wind pressed close. The candles had guttered lower when Catelyn slipped in without rattling the flap. "I thought you would come," Robb said, and did not turn. "I thought you would send for me," she said. "So I came when you did not." Robb nodded. Ser Roderick will not keep Winterfell if he cannot get men through the neck. Howland Reed knows those ways. He will guide a few, not an army. But a few may be enough to harass the Ironborn and keep them hungry and angry while we find a way to pry open Moat Cailin. Your father said that the neck belongs to the Crannogmen and to the bogs, Catelyn said. She took a seat on a stool and folded her hands. It belongs to secrets. He said the reeds there taught you a different kind of war. I have letters to write. Robb rubbed his eyes. They felt like grit in old mortar. To Howland, to Lady Mormont, to Wyman Manderley, to the Umbers. I need spears and oars and men stubborn enough to stand in a windstorm till their hair grows moss. If you had kept Theon, Catelyn began and then stopped. Her mouth went taut. If you had kept him, perhaps. Balon Greyjoy will not ransom his son, Robb said, and heard the weariness in his own voice like old trousers being tugged on for a hard day's work. He would hang a chain from his son's neck and beat a song from it. He might, Catelyn said softly, but there are others who might have used Theon's life for ours. There is power in a hostage, Robb. There is power in the law, Robb said. There is power in telling every man and woman in the North that faith will be met and betrayal answered. There is power in making what we do mean something more than what we want. Catelyn's eyes shone wet in the candlelight. You sound like your father, she said, and there was pride and grief in it in equal parts. I pray the world will not punish you for it. He laughed then, a small wrathing. It already does. They sat together until the candle burned low. The rain had thinned to a mist that made the world small and close around the camp. Robb set his hand on his mother's, and they both stared into the low fire until the logs collapsed in on themselves and made a sound like a door closing. When the news of Theon's death reached the Iron Islands, it was carried not by a raven but by a wave. Men talked to one another over nets and kegs and wheels, and the Whitecaps took their words and broke them into smaller words and brought them to pyres where the smoke turned black and rose straight up, as if asking a god a question to which there would be no answer. Asha Greyjoy smiled when she heard it, and then she did not smile at all. She stood on the cliffs at Pike and let the wind claw her cheeks until they stung. She had never much liked her brother, a fox who thought himself a wolf, but she had loved him in the way one loves a dog that humps legs and steals food and still looks at you as if you hung the moon over the sea. She had tried to warn him. He had not listened because he had not understood that a warning is a kind of love, and Asha had not understood that guilt can wear a grin as easily as a scowl. You knew it would end like this, her father said. Balon's voice was a rope pulled too tight, the fibers complaining. They killed him because he was weak. They killed him because he betrayed the man who gave him bread, Asha said. They killed him because he was a hostage and he remembered it only when it would make a good joke. Her father's face closed like a fist. You speak as if the land matters, he said, and Asha's belly tightened, because she had learned there was no answer to that in the Iron Islands that did not cost you. She bowed her head and said nothing, and he mistook it for submission, and so the day passed without blood. At Moat Cailin, where the reeds held mirrors up to the sky and the stone towers rose like broken teeth from green gums, a man with eyes the color of old rope squatted in a puddle and watched ironborn men relieve themselves into the bog and swear when the leeches found their calves. He was small and his fingers were deft. He had learned to move like a thought and to think like the moss. He put a sprig of mint in his mouth and chewed until its sharpness cut the sameness of wet. Wet, always wet. They had not taken the moat by storm. They had seeped into it like rain. They had learned the names of ironborn boys and the names of men and the names of their knives. They had sent word and knives both through reeds, to Howland Reed's hand, to the king in the Norths, and to Meege Mormont's on her bear-haunted island. They had learned patience from mud. At the Twins, patience was a shallower thing. Robb rowed across the bridge and let Walder Frye stare at him with the round pale eyes of an old fish. The castle smelled like onions and mutton stew gone to glue. The banners hanging limp in the damp were gray and blue and muddy green. Phrase came like a river. Thin mouths, narrow eyes, faces that looked like pieces of each other's faces borrowed and rearranged. You spurned us once, Walder said, as soon as courtesy had been paid and he could pretend to forget it. You wore my crossing as if it were a belt and then tossed it away when it didn't flatter you. Robb had brought his mother to this, though he had not wanted to. He thought perhaps she would read with an old Walder's blank gaze the old grudges and know how to soften them. The phrase turned out in numbers, counting heads and counting grievances as men count coins. To garrison, to prove you trust. Me, Robb nodded. I will leave you 300 under Lord Blackwood. He will not like it. If he turns surly, send me a raven and I'll send you a song to calm him. And who will you take? Walder asked, greed and mathematics both in the question. The Karstarks, Robb said without flinching. He had not hung the man who would have betrayed him in another river of this world, and his loyalty was battered but not broken. Grief had not yet made him a blade. Lady Mormont, the Umbers, Bolton, if he will. Roose Bolton tilted his head as if someone spoke to him from a high window. I will go with my king, he said smoothly. He did not say for how long that would remain true, because he did not know it himself. He found that he did not like being uncertain, and he filed away that feeling as a wound to salve later with a needle of his own choosing. When they rode north again, it was not with trumpets. It was not with banners high and proud. The banners were there, yes, but the reed banks ate them with mist and the wind left them alone. They rode carefully, with long pauses and shorter steps, and the men who had lived in the mists all their lives came out of the reeds in twos and threes and talked no more than they must. Men of the mountain clans came too, gaunt among the crowsbane spears, men who carried axes older than their beards. They found that the neck is a story your feet tell your lungs. The air learned to sit in the chest like a patient lizard. The ground betrayed them by looking solid until it reached up and took a horse. They moved by listening, by counting, by learning to tell one frog's croak from 10,000. They learned to sleep with 3 inches of water between their boots and the world and to be grateful for it. The Ironborn at Moat Cailin learned that their god on the waves cannot hear prayers said in a swamp. Asha's letter reached them late and told them little. Men counted for more than letters in the bog. They grew bored and mean. They chopped at fish with swords too long for the work. They shouted into the green to hear their own voices. The first night, a small thin boy in a cloak of fishskin came and left a basket with frogs' legs in it. They laughed, and in the morning one man was gone and a frog sat on his shield. Patiently, Howland Reed's traps turned men into lessons for other men. A man would step on a clump that was not a clump, and his weight pulled the hidden net from under the scum, so he went into water till his chin and a leaf fell onto his mouth and made him breathe swamp. Another would turn to answer a shout and find himself looking down a tunnel the moss had shaped, and at the end of it a dragonfly hung in a web, and to either side in the green the eyes of crannogmen watched him the way men watch ducks they will eat tonight. In the North Tower, the Ironborn captain coughed and spat and told himself that this was nothing. This was a game. His hands shook when he unrolled a map. Men die in wars, he said. This is not a war. This is a place that hates me. 5 days into the siege that was not a siege, Robb took 6 men and followed a crannogman through knee-deep water that sang like a saw when you pulled your foot up from it. He moved by the sound of his own breath more than by sight, through green and gray and the occasional flare of a kingfisher like a thought he had lost and found again. The crannogman stopped, lifted 2 fingers, and then, impossibly, walked up onto the water. Robb stared, and it took him a moment to understand that under the green was a path of old stone laid in a time before men wrote so much as a love letter. They came up beneath one of the moat's broken flanks, where the stones had tumbled into the marsh like a drunk into bed. The crannogmen had taught them how to tie reed bundles that did not become water, and how to put mud where it would hide human smell, and how to breathe without becoming lungs for leeches. They waited until the moon went behind thin cloud. They waited until a man whose boots were too new shifted his weight and cursed under his breath. Then they moved. It was not a story of swords crossing. It was a story of hands on mouths and knives that opened throats so surprised that the blood flowed without a noise. It was 2 men struck with a baton against the temple and falling like trees. It was a rope placed round an ankle and pulled so that a body slid away into green. It was one Ironborn who insisted on turning to shout and found his voice swallowed by the bog. Robb found himself behind a man who smelled of stale ale and fear and home in reverse. The man turned. Robb saw his beard and his age and the way his eyes tried to find him, and could not because Robb had already moved and already brought the hilt up and cracked his jaw. The man was on the ground, his breath going out of him like air from a skin, when Robb put the point at the hollow of his throat. "Yield," he said. A memory of Ser Rodrik in rain layered over the voice he had now. "Yield and call your men. Yield, or I will feed you to this place you have tried to live in." The man yielded. His men yielded. The south tower fell without waking the north tower, and then the west fell without the east, and then all the towers that had seemed tall as emblems became stones again under the weight of the place they stood in. At dawn the banners of the dire wolf and the reed both moved, and the black-sailed banners had been lowered and put away without anyone needing to say what it meant that they had not been burned. It meant those men could go home if they could find a boat, and if the Crannogmen allowed it, and if the god in their waves forgave them for being so far from him. They opened the neck then like a fist unclenching. They sent men ahead with poles to judge the ground. They moved the wounded on platforms that floated like leaves. They came out onto the higher lands like men who have been held underwater too long and did not know until then how much. Their lungs had been waiting. Before them, Winterfell lay a long hard ride and a day's grace after that for the horses. There were ravens that knew the way and riders who had learned to read the muddle of paths by smell and the way the sun lifted itself over this tree and that. Robb rode ahead with the Great John, with Roose Bolton whose silence hung about him like an extra layer of cloth, and with a handful of Crannogmen who found the land too solid after a while and would slip away to lie in the ditches a time and breathe close to the ground again. When they came up the long slope toward the first glimpse of Winterfell's tower tops, Robb's breath snagged on a memory so hard that he almost missed his horse's step. It was how it had always been in his heart's eye. Smoke curled from the roofs where smoke ought to curl. The weirwood's white stood out in the god's wood like bone under skin. A guard on the wall turned his head and then straightened and stared as if he had woken from a dream to find the dream in armor below him. Ser Rodrik came to meet them in the yard, his beard tidier than the last time Robb had seen it. A girl child of 5 clinging to his belt the way children do when they cannot decide if they want to hide or be seen. Maester Luwin was at the base of the steps with Bran's chair beside him. Bran looked older than he had any right to look, and his eyes slid past the crowd until they found Robb and then held there like a ship finding its harbor. Rickon bolted toward him, small legs a blur, Shaggy Dog bounding like a piece of night with teeth. Robb dismounted and folded his brother up. Rickon smelled like boy and dog and the iron tang of someone who has learned too young that the world cuts. Robb bent to kiss Bran's hair, and Bran reached up and put his hand on Robb's face and held it as if to make sure it was real. Catelyn, who had ridden hard with the vanguard, had tears that left cool tracks on cheeks turned rough by wind. Rosalind stood a little back and watched as if she were at the edge of a story she had always been told but had never believed could really be walked into. "You brought our father's hall a king," Maester Luwin said, his voice steady because he had decided it would be. "And Winterfell brings you your brothers." Robb closed his eyes against the rush in him. He did not pretend that kingship mattered at that moment more than being a brother did. He let the moment be what it was. That night he went to the Godswood. He went alone and in the manner of the North, which means he carried only his thoughts and the right to bring them to the red weeping face in the tree. The snow had not come yet, but the cold lay in the earth like an idea waiting for the right man to voice it. The Godswood smelled of damp leaves and the iron in sap. He knelt before the heart tree and put his hand on the old smooth hill of its root. He told his father what he had done. He told him of Theon and of the sword and of the head that had rolled and the eyes that had not found any mercy as they moved. He told him of Moat Cailin and of the phrase and of a girl with small uneven teeth who had made him laugh when he had thought he had forgotten how. He told him of Roose Bolton's eyes and how the man's quiet made him uneasy in a way that had no evidence, only the hair lifting on the back of the neck. He waited, knowing there would be no answer he could hear with his ears. He felt the air shift in the leaves. He heard the little noises of the weirwood that men hear when they say a prayer and a breeze tickles the hair by their temples. He let his breath out in a long, slow stream, and when he opened his eyes again he felt steadier in the way a man does when he remembers he can stand. In the morning, The council met in the great hall where the ceiling beams were carved as if by teeth. Great John Umber slapped the table and said he would eat iron if that would make the Iron Islands smaller. Lady Meage Mormont said she had no use for islands at all. They were puddles with delusions. Wyman Manderley sent a letter couched in courtesies so fat they almost broke the little flagon that carried them, saying White Harbor stood ready to provide ships and provisions, and a list of his kinsmen's courage that read like a brag it would be unkind to disprove. Roose Bolton offered men from the Dreadfort in a voice as thin and careful as a man offering a knife across a narrow plank, so that you must either take it or cut your hand. Robb accepted the knife politely and did not set it down. They planned to clear the Ironborn from Deepwood Motte. Robb wanted Asha and any of her men who had arms to be given a chance to run to their boats rather than fight to the last on land. Some men fumed at that. Robb did not call them cowards. He called them soldiers. He called this war. He listened to Catelyn in the corner of the hall, to her soft words that wrapped around hard advice. He listened to Ser Roderick when he said there would always be men like Theon and he could not let that make him trustless. He watched Bran listening to everything and then slipping away with the quiet girl and her brother with the frog-green eyes. He watched Rickon gnawing on a piece of apple as if to test its weakness and its sweetness at once. The ravens brought news like a bucket bringing water, sometimes clean and sometimes full of leaves. The largest measure of water came from the south. Stannis had sailed to King's Landing, and the city had held after a night that Aaron Santagar would later call the Blackwater in tones that groped for poetry and fell short. Tywin Lannister lived, and he had brought new friends with him, men as subtle as a tanner's mallet. The war did not end. It lengthened. Robb sent word to Riverrun that he had married and would keep the Fry Crossing garrisoned and friendly. He told Edmure to hold his waters and not let his pride run through his hands like a boy puddle stomping. He knew his uncle would hear half of that, and hold the half that did him honor. He sent to the Vale again and got back common sense and fear bundled in the language of love. He sent to the Riverlands villages and told them to plant winter wheat if they had seed, to save their barley, to mend their roofs as if peace were coming because hunger killed kings faster than swords. Rosalind took to Winterfell the way a bird takes to a raft house in a new barn. She moved quietly. She did not insist. She learned the names of the women in the kitchens and the men in the yard, and she laughed with Hodder when he tugged his forelock and called her Lady Hodder, each time as if it were new. She went once with Catelyn to the sept that had been built for her sake and said the seven faces looked foolish and loving in the cold. And then she slipped out to the Godswood and put her hand on the white bark as if to say, I am here. The tree, which had survived lords and snows and lightning in its time, did not object. And when will you go south? She asked him, when they stood on the wall walk and looked past the pines to where the world became hills and then a smudge of sky. When I must, Robb said. And when I can. Now we have the neck. Now we can move men and grain and words back and forth without drowning any of them. The Ironborn will hold the coasts as long as any man can in winter. We will root them out where we can. We will make them choose between famine and boats. And the Lannisters? Rosalind asked. She did not look at him when she said Lannister. It was as if a taboo in her house had been broken by marriage and she still expected the ceiling to fall. They will expect us to be weak, Robb said. We are a different shape of strong now. We are not a spear. We are a glacier. We do not pierce. We grind. She shivered and smiled at once. You do speak like the singers. I am trying, he said. I am trying to be a man my father would have recognized and a king who can live in a world where my father's ways do not always work. She slid her hand into his and held it, and the cold did not feel as harsh as it had a moment before. Ramsay Snow came late to the knowledge that secrets are knives. He came back to the Dreadfort and found his father's greeting neither warm nor cold. Roose looked at him as if measuring an object of some use and some danger. You have lost me, Winterfell, Roose said. As one might say, you have spilled my wine. Ramsay smiled, which is what he did when he wanted to hide fury. The Greyjoy boy was taken by fools who leave the stable door open. I had a plan. The plan was not ruined by my folly. Roose's eyes did not blink. It was ruined, nonetheless. Who should I blame? The gods? The rain? The reed? Ramsay said with contempt too strong to be masked. The frog people? They came up like rot and made the Greyjoy piss himself. I was ready to burn the castle to punish them and take it for my own. And the boy had it taken before my tinder would catch. We might still burn it, father." Roose turned his head. He did it slowly, and it was a small movement that weighed as much as a larger one would in another man. "We will not burn the seat of our liege lords. We will not pretend that would make us lords of anything but ashes. The Manderleys have made overtures, and the Freys will be held to their bargain longer now that the king in the north lies with their blood in his bed. We could make our own king," Ramsay said. He put a finger to his lips and licked the salt of his own sweat and found it pleasing. "The north is a cold bitch. She opens for the man who does not ask. She opens when you press." Roose considered his bastard and filed away the thought that whatever else he might be, Ramsay was a heat a man could put his hands near when the fire ran low and there was a need to do something more than rub them together. "We will press in other ways," he said. "We will go to Winterfell and you will put on your smile. You will hunt hares and widows and you will bring them dead or alive depending on whether the king wants meat or company. We will be loyal. For now." For now were words that Ramsay liked, because they lifted a thing up and set it on a shelf where he could admire it and imagine setting it alight at a time of his choosing. In King's Landing, Sansa moved through a garden of lemon and orange that only existed in memory and tried to remember whether snows in the north were called snow or stark. She heard, through hands that could not help being kind, that her brother had wed a Frey girl and had lived to lie with her, which sounded so strange she wanted to laugh. She learned to walk more softly with those words in her pocket. Tyrion Lannister sat across from her at supper and watched her as one watches a dance from some valley one has never visited. "If your brother is prudent," he said, almost to his whine, "he will return to the north and build himself into a mountain." "He has already sacrificed much," Sansa said. She held her spoon very steady and pretended that every man in the hall did not look at it. "He will not abandon the Riverlands." Tyrion smiled without joy. "Ah, you do know him. That will save you some disappointments and cost you others." He drank. "Your lady mother always had a gift for triangles. She thought they were roof beams. Often they were stakes." That night, Sansa lay awake in a bed whose wooden posts had been polished by hands that believed in money more than gods. She thought of Robb's hands, of the spot of paler skin on his left forefinger where a practice blade had bit deep when he was 11 and it had healed wrong. She pressed that finger in her mind against her own palm and shut her eyes. Arya did not hear of Theon's death until she had seen 3 different kinds of men die by other means. She had learned the smell of fear for horses and the smell for men, and the way they were sometimes the same despite what men said. The Brotherhood without banners took the news like men passin'. Gee around a loaf with only one piece of meat in it and smiling anyway. When someone said that the king in the north had taken the head himself, the hound spat into the fire and called it theatrics. "He is his father's son," Arya said. She was not sure whether it made her chest feel lighter or heavier to say it. "The world will break him of that if it gets the chance," the hound said. "And if it does not, he'll break it a little. Either way, there's blood enough for everyone to bathe in." "That's disgusting," she said. And then she went away and sat with her needle and pricked her finger and watched the bright second bead form, and she smiled and did not know why the smile hurt her cheeks so much. Winter deepened. The air thinned and got teeth. Men at Deepwood Motte found that a wall with snow on its head is a different creature than a wall with rain on it. Robb moved his men along the coasts carefully, and Howland Reed's folk moved along the inner veins of the land and sent word where Ironborn had come to bleed clumsy holes. Lady Meage Mormont marched her bear men into the deep pines and found Ironborn who laughed at the thought of women in winter and whose laughter stopped shorter than they had expected. Asha made a choice. She took as many men as would fit into 3 longships drawn up on a cold narrow beach with rocks like knives on either side. She burned 2 of the ships because the ice coming in threatened to take them anyway. She left a letter under a hawk's skull in a cave mouth where she knew men would look for dry kindling. It said only, "You have learned the land is stronger than the sea here. Learn also that the winter is stronger than you. Go home." Robb stood with Wyman Manderley on the parapet at White Harbor and watched men in boats take soft fat fishes from the cold gray water and turn them into hard meat with salt. Wyman was red of face and jovial of tone and careful of mind. He offered the king a pie. He would not say what was in it. Robb ate it and smiled and said it tasted of good kitchens and not of secrets. Wyman laughed and turned to business in a way that made Robb like him very much. "We will build ships," Wyman said. "For all that building ships in winter is a madness only Manderleys and fools attempt. We will teach men to stand on the water. We will teach them to be solid near something that is not. We will feed your men with fish if we cannot feed them with grain. We will feed them in any case with hope, your grace, and that is the best diet in wartime and the worst when it ends. Pray it does not end in a way that makes that insight facture," Robb said. He put his elbows on the cold stone. "I mean to push at the coasts but not pour ourselves into the sea. You might have men with sense enough to keep that from happening." "I have men. Sense is extra," Wyman said. "Sometimes the extra comes in a fat package." They both smiled and then grimaced in the same heartbeat as a wind came up that cut attention like a slap. By the time the first snows stayed not only for a morning but for a week, Robb had pushed Asha out of Deepwood and laid a hand on the shore that had been map and meaning for so long. Men muttered that he should go farther, that he should leap from rock to rock and snatch back from the Iron Men every inlet and every cave. He did not. He was a glacier. He ground. The Lannisters kept their fires lit in the south. Tywin wrote letters that crawled like red centipedes across the land. He demanded and punished and rewarded in ways that made men believe him a god until they saw the knot of gold at the center and then laughed because gods do not wear knots. He tried to tempt Roose Bolton with ifs and promises, and Roose Bolton let him try and watch the letters burn where his servants knew only that the fire liked paper very much on a cold night. "You will betray him in the end," Ramsay said to his father when he had eaten a woman's finger as if it were a little sausage and licked his mouth like a child. "I will betray someone in the end," Roose said, which was the kind of truth that was not useful until the sort of day came when all other kinds of truth had failed. Harrenhal burned the last of its fuel early, and men warmed their hands at rumors. The Brotherhood were a thorn in Lord Tywin's foot, and he had thick boots and thicker patience, but a thorn finds a way to remind a man he is a man and not a god. A red priest came to the Riverlands with a knowing smile, and the small folk tied their hopes to ropes, and those ropes broke and made stories that were neither true nor false, because nothing that complicated can be letters alone. Catelyn watched over Winterfell like a woman at last with a baby asleep who will not be roused, and she knew if she was to have peace in it she must not stand too near the cradle. She walked with Luwin and the children and learned the places in the castle that the absence of her husband had made into hollows and filled them with tasks only a lady could do, and did not tell herself this was enough. She wrote letters to Riverrun and to her sister and to the Vale and burned 2 out of 3 because the words did not sit right on the page. She found happiness sometimes, and it startled her, and she learned to accept its startle as a sign that she was not yet done with loving this world. "Would you have spared him?" she asked Ser Roderick once, when the rain threatened, and then remembered what snow was and tried it. "No," Roderick said without turning. He watched boys practice crossbows, flinching when the strings snapped but standing his ground, for that was what a master-at-arms does when the noise that makes others jump means the world stays built. "But I am an old man. What I would have done is not a measure for a king. You think your king did wrong." "I think," Roderick said carefully, "that often the choice is between wrong and wronger, and that the gods made us clever so we could know which is which. Theon was a boy and not a boy. He was a lesson for us all. He was also a person. Your son named him both and did not pretend he was only one." Catelyn took that into herself and found it did not sit comfortably, and accepted that as well. It was in the second winter month, with the bogs frozen hard enough that they cracked like old bones when stepped on, that 2 horns sounded from the south wall near noon. The gate captain sent a boy to fetch the king. The boy ran and grinned and ran again. His breath smoked in the air like witches' laughter. Robb met him at the outer yard. He had been listening to a woman from Barrowton who had a plan for making a wheel turn on the river that could crush grain faster than men's feet. He asked her to wait, and she smiled cornerwise because only a man raised to be old would think he could ask the river to wait. Then she shrugged. She had waited for less. At the wall, the snow came off the stones in rags where men's hands had rubbed it away. The rider who waited below the gate had a beard rimed white and eyes the color of nuts under skins. He wore a cloak which had once been a fine velvet and was now a burden of ice. He looked up and saw Robb and shouted something that the wind ate. They opened the wicket for him, and he walked his horse in with a stiffness that told of hours of cold and days of worse. He had a letter. It was written in the rounded hand of a man who had been holding words to keep them from spilling. Came from Riverrun. Edmure's sentences ran long, the way he himself always did when trying to explain how he had not erred. Between the fluster of his pride there was the message. Lannister men were moving more than before. There were new tax levies, a rumor of a marriage being arranged that would take a key piece off their board if they did not stop it. It ended with a softer hand that was not Edmure's. A line in Catelyn's script from another letter. Be wary of gifts. Even bread. Robb's jaw flexed. He thought of the river turning to stone under ice, and how a man who thought it would bear him forever might find himself under it quickly with fish where his feet should be. He thought of the Freys and their grudges, and the way Walder loved to turn invitations into obligations and obligations into snares you walked into for the pleasure of setting your foot on a knot you thought was not there. He folded the letter. He pressed it into his palm and felt the pressure as he might feel a wound he could not stop remembering. The wind whipped his cloak. He turned, and the men near him turned as the voice in him did what it must and spoke through his mouth. We will send men to Riverrun, he said. We will not empty our house to chase news. We will not be baited. We will look to the Boltons and the Umbers to hold the eastern marching while we hold the heart. We will move as the north moves. You speak like a man whose kin sit safe, and the rest of us bear the weight of your caution, Greyjoy said, slow and clear, because he loved his king, and that meant he must be the one to call him coward when he thought caution stank of it. We move because we are alive, Robb said, looking up at the wall where snow had gathered like white flags that wouldn't be taken for banners. We live because we move. We will not be trod into mush to please the south. If the Riverlands are a hearth, I will bring wood to them. I will not be the spark that jumps and burns the curtains. Greyjoy stared, and then his grin broke like spring ice, and he nodded and slapped his thigh, which is how men from the Umbers show acquiescence when they must and cheer when they can. As winter tightened, news became a different thing. Men could not ride as quickly. Words took longer to reach their targets. Letters went slower and sometimes turned to soaked fiber in ravens' claws. Robb found that in the quiet moments when nothing new had happened, a fear crept up and tried to fill the space, and he set his days so that there were fewer quiet moments and more work. He learned the sizes of men's appetites and the measure of their patience with oats. He learned what made a good boot and how many cheeks a small child's belly could giggle into. He lay with Rosalind in a bed curtained by furs and listened to the way winter made sound itself into something that had weight. He was not a fool. He knew he could be happy in the middle of a war and still be unhappy that war was there. He told her stories of the yard when they were boys, and she told him stories of the way a house like the twins made you learn to be many of a thing at once to get any of it. They took comfort and gave it back and drank it between them like warm drink in a cold. When Bran told him he wished to go north, he laughed. It was not because it was funny. It was because he had no other sound ready that would hold it. Bran was very solemn about it. He had the air of a boy delivering a letter beyond his years and beyond his shoulder strength. I dreamed it, he said, as if that were currency that ought to be accepted in every market. The three-eyed crow calls me, and I must learn to fly. Robb wanted to say, you are a boy. You will live with us and eat with us and learn to be a man and not freeze to death following a story through the snow. He could not say this because Bran knew the winter in a way Robb did not, had been made a home in it by a cruel and unintended stroke from a tower, and had found a different roof than the one Robb could provide. Robb held onto his temper and then let go of it as he had learned to do. He listened to Jojen, to the frog boy's slow talk that seemed to come from far down a well. He listened to Mira, who would not compromise with anyone's plan that did not include her brother leaving and returning under his own steps if there was breath in him. He watched Hodder, who would bear whatever burden he was given and hum as if it were a song he'd chosen himself. Catelyn's face did something that was not breathing when Bran told her. He saw her die a little and then deny it with that stubborn piece of her that had kept so much up without a partner to hold the other end. It was Luwin who surprised them all. He put his hand on Bran's hair and said softly, "If there are gods, they sometimes speak in dreams. If there are not, the dreams are not smaller for it." He walked with Bran to the godswood and argued with the tree gently until the afternoon turned and the light put an edge on the trunk's ridges. When they came away, Bran's mouth was a line but not an unhappy one. Luwin went to his chambers and closed the door and drank a little easy wine and did not cry because his body was too old and tired to find tears. In the morning, he sent Bran with 2 small vials of things that would harden a torch flame in a wind and soften bog water into something you could drink if you had to that would not rot your insides faster than thirst. When the party left by night and no one saw them go, Robb stood on the wall in the cold air that sits on ears and tells them the names of stars and felt glad that for once no one would put this choice on a chain and hang it around his neck and call it a symbol. He let it be a boy leaving his home to go find another meaning he could not carry if he stayed. He did not know if he would ever see his brother again. He learned that knowledge sits on you lighter if you name it and do not pretend it is anything else. Years would later say the war had turned there or here or somewhere else entirely, because years of a certain kind cannot believe that thousands of small shoves make the world move more than a single hard kick does. The truth was messier and more like life. Robb's north ground on. It pushed the Iron Men off the jag-toothed coasts and taught them they were safest where the sea kissed the rocks. It wrestled with Tywin's long letters and with Roos's silence and with the way Ramsay's smile always seemed to have bits of what he had eaten caught in it, even when his mouth was clean. It held the Riverlands as well as it could. Planted grain where it could. It buried dead so the wolves would not learn the taste more than they had to. Roose Bolton came to Robb with a plan in the late winter, when the sky looked like hammered pewter and a wind blew so steady that men forgot any other motion existed. He unrolled a parchment that diagrammed a solution to the tangle around Harrenhal and the raiders on the fords that had gnawed the Riverlands thin as thread. He would take men east and silk his way behind the trouble and strangle it. He would be back in a month or 2 or 3. He would not leave Winterfell unguarded if he did not go. He would leave the bastard there to lead hunts against men who were stealing sheep and against wolves who were becoming too bold. Robb wanted to refuse. He wanted to keep Roose under his eye where the pale thing could not go gray and disappear into the world. He also wanted results, and the parchment made a kind of hard plain sense. He looked at the Great John and saw suspicion, and at Lady Mormont and saw willingness to risk, and at his mother and saw the way she did not like to leave a man alone with a fireblade and a dim room. "Go," he said, and he hated himself a little for it, and he trusted himself more for doing a thing he hated that the war needed. "Go and send me ravens with proof you are doing what you say." Roose bowed. His eyes did not blink. "As my king commands." The snow came down in feathers that night, and in the morning the yard was a tablecloth someone had shaken flour onto. Rosalind made a game with the scullery girls, catching flakes on their tongues and pretending to decide which had caught the prettiest. Robb had never considered a flake pretty. He learned to look at them as more than weather. He learned to see how they might be a truce between wars when they were small and a burial when they were not. It was a small war of a different kind that came to him then, and he met it in the place where a kitchen serves a hall, with steam on the air and the sound of a woman scolding a boy very softly for trying to steal 2 apples when one would have been easier to hide. The war was in the person of a young man with freckles arrayed on his face like a constellation, and a cap with a badger pinned to it. "My lord," the man said, breathless to be in so near a space to a king and remembering the training that told him to bow and not spill his words in a heap. "There's a man. There's a man at the gate says he has come from the south with a flag of..." He hesitated because the word tasted wrong in his mouth in winter. "Truce. He brings a letter." Robb looked at Catelyn because she was the knowledge of everything that would possibly be wrong, and also the place where it would be right in the end even if it cost. She nodded once. "See him," she said. "Better in a hall than a yard. The wind will make him brave." The man in the hall smelled like long travel and careful propaganda. He wore a Lannister livery under a wool cloak that had cost too much for someone sailing in winter. He held himself the way men who have been instructed to be humble for show hold themselves, as if the humility were a suit and itched. He bowed. He held out the letter. He did not smile. Robb broke the seal. The wax had been warmed by a good fire and an old cold heart. The letter was not long. It did not need to be. It was an offer and a trap and a test, as many letters from kings to kings are. Tyrion's hand in it was in the cleanness of the phrasing and the way the jokes were hidden until you stepped on them and thought you had discovered them yourself. Tywin's hand was in the measure of the threats and the way the roads through winter were an added weapon. The letter proposed a marriage for Sansa to a man whose name was not given but whose person was described. It proposed a trade that would make the North a friend in winter and a hostage in spring. Proposed, as all such letters do, that words and blood have the same price. Catelyn listened to Robb read and did not move. When he finished, she said, "They did not offer us bread." Rosalind hid a smile behind politeness. The great John snorted. Lady Mormont said that Lannisters liked bread so much they had tried to build a city out of it. Roose was not there to make a remark that would have meant the opposite of whatever it sounded like. Robb folded the letter and laid it on the table as if it were a piece of meat he was deciding whether to cook or throw to the dogs. "We answer," he said. "We say we will discuss marriages when our sister is returned to us, not before. We say that trade is possible between men, and so is ease, and so is trust, but those things have to be made with work and time and not with paper. We say that the North is the North and will be treated as such or not at all." The messenger nodded. He would lose his bonus for this, perhaps, and he would live for having delivered it in one piece. He bowed and asked if the king had any other commands. Robb dismissed him with courtesy and with food because he was northern in his bones and would not send a man back on an empty belly wherever he was going. He lay awake that night while Rosalind slept beside him, and the snow outside made a sound like a hand moving along a drum's skin lightly, rhythmically. He thought of Theon's head and of all the heads that would follow into all the bags, and of how he had chosen at the first to make the war mean something and all the men who would choose at the last to make it mean another thing. He thought of his father, and of the way the man's name had made roads open and close in this world when it had been attached to a body that could move across them. He resolved what he could resolve then, in a cold bed that had been warmer an hour before. He would hold the North and grind the Iron Men out of its coast. He would feed the Riverlands and make them a line instead of a wound. He would parley with the South when there was sense in it and deny their gifts when they came looking like bread. He would not be the end of the world as his father had loved it. He would be the line through which that love could continue into a world that did not share it easily. In the morning, a raven bit his finger as he folded a reply, and he laughed because of all the things that could hurt him, that one shone so little and yet stung so well. He found that, too, a useful truth to carry forward. Years later, not so many years as the old like, more years than the young can bear, the storytellers would argue whether the boy who cut the head off the boy he had loved like a brother had turned the war or merely turned himself into the kind of man who could decide which kind of wrong was necessary. The ones who hated him would say he had thrown away his leverage. The ones who loved him would say he had held onto the last scrap of a law that kept the roof up while the storm screamed. The quiet truth was that men made choices and then made stories to fit them, and the stories changed less than the men did. What Robb knew when he woke each day in winter and took his sword in his hand and then set it aside because he needed quills and lists more than blades, was that his choice had built him into a shape of king that could not be easily bent to later needs. He was a glacier. He ground. He carved the valleys that others walked through without understanding who had made them. He did not always win because that is not how this world works. He made what wins he could mean something for longer than their moment. When spring finally ran the glaciers back a little, there were ships at White Harbor and men in the Riverlands who called themselves farmers again and made the word an act of defiance. There were fewer ironborn on the coasts and more of them in their houses, thinking of raiding inland and not doing it because the memory of the land's teeth was too fresh. There were stories in the south of a northern king with a dire wolf howling at his heels and a fry queen with a bear's heart who had learned to make the hall women and men in equal parts. Theon's skull lay somewhere under earth, a thing that could not be identified as anyone in particular unless you knew the breath it had once contained. Asha took a ship once and sailed near the place where men say sirens sing and threw into the water a strip of leather that had once been a thong for her brother's knife, though she did not know whether it had been, and she found that her sleep afterwards was less troubled for a time. Ramsay took a woman into the byre and came out alone and smiled at a child, and the child did not smile back. Roose wrote a letter he did not send. Sansa practiced a song she would not sing in public. Arya learned a name and spit it into the dark, and the dark did not echo. It absorbed. In the Godswood at Winterfell, where the new leaves came in like tiny hands making fists and then learning to open, Robb Stark knelt before the heart tree and put his palm against the bark. It was warm. Everything was. Summer would come again. Men would make more wars in it. He had done this thing and not that, and he did not know if anyone would ever remember that one man's small stubbornness had held a certain shape of justice above ground long enough for others to see it and want it later. The truth was that he had to be able to live with himself between the times the world allowed him to be busy. If he could manage that, the rest was gravy, his father would have said, and eaten with the enjoyment of a man who did not believe he deserved it and took it anyway. He stood. He breathed in. Somewhere a boy laughed and a dog barked and a woman scolded and another woman sang. Somewhere a raven took wing with a message no one would read in time. The North held. It would not forever. But it held now, and because it held now, there would be a later for someone else to hold. He went to the hall with snow, still stuck in the stitching at the ankles of his trousers, and he went to war again, which is what kings do when they are worth the name. They go to their long work and try to make their long work matter.